Those words were still echoing in my head as I sat in the courthouse parking lot, hands locked around the steering wheel of my truck. My name is Alan Morrison. I'm 49 years old, and today I watched my wife of 23 years tell a judge that she was entitled to $14 million of my money, half ownership of my construction company, and the lake house my grandfather built with his bare hands. Victoria always had a gift with language. That's how she drew me in back in college, me, just a broke kid from Billings, Montana, juggling 3 jobs to cover my engineering courses. She was studying journalism, and she could spin anything into sounding fair, even when it was far from it. Sitting there in that courtroom, hearing her lawyer talk like I was some bum who stumbled into wealth by luck, I felt something hard and cold take root inside me. 23 years of marriage, and she painted me as a thief who'd stolen her life. The truth was, I'd been sensing this storm for months, small cracks showing through the surface. Her sudden curiosity about the company's numbers, the push to revise our insurance policies, her newfound obsession with my schedule where I'd be, when I'd be there. 2 weeks ago I caught her digging in my desk. She said she was hunting for stamps, but I kept those in the kitchen. When I pressed her, she gave me that familiar look, the one that accused me of being paranoid and controlling. That night I began paying sharper attention, the hushed phone calls, the laptop with a new password, the unexplained lunches with unnamed people. George Brennan, my lawyer and old friend, had cautioned me that it could get ugly. He'd been drafting contracts for my business for 15 years, and knew Victoria well enough not to be fooled by her charm. After our first consultation, he pulled me aside and said something that stuck like a nail in the wall. When someone plots a divorce this carefully, chances are they've been planning it a lot longer than you think. Now, watching her stride out of the courthouse beside her attorney, I finally understood. This wasn't about drifting apart or failing to connect. It was strategy. She wasn't looking for fairness, she was looking to strip me bare and claim everything I'd poured myself into. Victoria slid into the silver BMW I'd given her last Christmas and drove away without even a glance back. She had no clue what was waiting in the manila folder on my passenger seat. Some betrayals blindside you. Others you can sense long before they hit. But the cruelest are the ones that reveal how long you've been played while you are too trusting to see it. I started Morrison, construction straight out of college with nothing but a beat-up truck and a toolbox my dad had given me. Victoria had been there from the beginning, or at least I thought she was. She brought me coffee to job sites, organized invoices at our kitchen table, posed in pictures when we landed that first big contract. She seemed proud then. She bragged to her friends about how I'd built a business from the ground up, expanding from small houses to major commercial projects. When we won the bid for the new medical center in downtown Billings, she threw a party and told everyone her husband was the man behind Morrison Construction, but somewhere down the line, that pride twisted into something else. I was so busy expanding the business that I didn't notice when she stopped celebrating my wins, when she stopped asking questions about the work, too focused on providing for our future to realize she'd started seeing my success less as ours and more as hers. By right. We never had children. First, Victoria said she wasn't ready. Later, she argued that the company took too much of my time for us to be decent parents. I carried that regret for years, wondering if kids might have given us something more solid than money and convenience to build on. When my parents passed, Dad from a heart attack, Mum following 6 months later because she couldn't live without him, they left me the lake house and 40 acres on Flathead Lake, land our family had held since the 1940s. Almost immediately, Victoria suggested selling, said it was too remote, too much upkeep. I refused. That place wasn't just property, it was heritage. It was where I came from. After that, she stopped mentioning it, but I'd catch her browsing lakefront listings, her eyes calculating what ours might bring. The warnings had been their phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room, lunch receipts from upscale places with vague explanations, sudden interest in bank statements she'd never cared about. Last month, I found a private investigator's card in her purse. She claimed she'd grabbed it for a friend, but on the back, in her handwriting, were notes, my daily schedule, my office address, questions about asset searches. That night, I called George and told him to brace for the worst. His advice was blunt: Alan, get your house in order. This feels like a setup. I should have listened sooner. The papers came on a Tuesday morning, hand-delivered by a process server who looked like he hated his job. Victoria had moved out the weekend before, saying she needed space. She left with her clothes, her jewelry, and the silver BMW, abandoning 23 years of marriage like it was a lease that expired. Sitting at my kitchen table with the documents, I felt something final settle in me. She wasn't asking for half. She was demanding specific parts of my life, line by line, $14 million in cash and assets, half ownership of Morrison Construction, the lake house and 40 acres, $15,000 a month in support for the next decade, even the right to use the Morrison name for her future design business. Every line was a calculated strike. The lake house cut the deepest. She knew that land was my soul, which meant she'd probably use it as leverage for something else she wanted. But what truly shattered me was the timeline. 8 months. She'd been engineering this for 8 months, sitting across from me at dinner, sharing a bed, pretending to mend things while secretly documenting every move I made. I called George right away. She wants everything, I told him. I know, he said. I got the same papers this morning. Alan, this isn't divorce. This is a corporate takeover dressed as a marriage ending. What are my options? I asked. Limited if we play by their rules, but there may be another way. That afternoon, I drove to the lake, sat on the dock my grandfather built, staring at the water that had carried my family for generations. Victoria never understood why it mattered. To her it was just acreage with a view. I thought back to the early days weekends we spent here before the business consumed my time, when she seemed content just being with me. Before money became her scorecard, that woman I once loved was gone. What remained was someone who believed my life's work was her entitlement. From that dock, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my accountant. I told him to freeze every joint account until the divorce was settled. Proceedings. The second was to a private investigator George had recommended, a former police detective named Patricia Hayes who specialized in financial fraud cases. If Victoria wanted to play hardball, I'd give her a game she'd never forget. The water was still as glass that evening, reflecting the mountains like a mirror. Soon, Victoria would discover that some reflections show you things you'd rather not see. I filed my counter-response to week. George had crafted it carefully. We weren't just defending against Victoria's demands. We were questioning the basis for them. How had she calculated the value of my business? Where had she gotten the financial cords she'd cited? Who had helped harass us the worth of private assets that weren't part of our joint property? Victoria's reaction was swift and within 24 hours, I received a restraining order claiming I'd been threatening her. According to her sworn statement, I'd followed her to her new apartment, sent intimidating text messages, and made verbal threats about what would happen if she proceeded with divorce. None of it was true. I had her phone records to prove it. Threatening messages, no contact at all since she'd moved out. But their restraining order meant I couldn't approach her, couldn't contact her directly, and looked like an unstable, controlling husband to anyone who didn't know the facts. The local newspaper picked up the story. Prominent businessmen served with in contentious divorce. Victoria had fed them just enough to make me look bad without mentioning her $14 million demands or suspicious timing of her legal preparations. My business started feeling the impact. 2 potential clients called to postpone meetings. The bank that handled our construction loans requested additional documentation for a project we'd already been approved for. Nothing direct, nothing they could be sued for, but enough to make my life complicated. George warned me this was just the beginning. She's trying to isolate you, make you look unreliable and dangerous. Classic strategy. If she can damage your business and reputation, she strengthens her case for maximum financial support. But the worst part was discovering how deep her preparation went. Patricia Hayes, the private investigator, had been working quietly for 10 days when she called with her first report. Mr. Morrison, your wife has been planning this for at least 18 months, not 8. I found evidence of consultation with 3 different divorce attorneys, 2 different private and a forensic accountant who specializes in business valuations. 18 months she's been building a case against you since before your parents died. The timing of this divorce is she waited until Thelic House property was fully transferred to your name, until your business finished its best year on record, until your personal net worth hit its peak. I felt sick. While I'd been grieving my parents and building our future, Victoria had been calculating how to take it all away. There's more, Patricia. She's been secretly recording conversations with you for months. Phone calls, dinner conversations, private eye discussions about the business. She's got hundreds of hours of audio that she plans to use to prove you're controlling and financially manipulative. Is that legal? In Montana, only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation. Since she was part of a conversation she recorded, it's admissible in court. The full scope of Victoria's betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Every intimate conversation, every private discussion about our future, Every moment I thought we were alone, she'd been gathering evidence to use against him that night. I sat in my empty house and realized I wasn't just fighting a divorce proceeding. I was fighting a woman who'd spent nearly 2 years systematically documenting my life, studying my weaknesses, and building a legal case designed to destroy everything I'd worked for. She'd turned our marriage into a reconnaissance. But Patricia had found something else. Something Victoria did know about. Mr. Morrison. There's one more thing. Your wife has been meeting regularly with someone you know. Someone who's been feeding her inside information about your business operations. My blood went cold. Who? Your business partner, Kyle Brennan, Georgia's younger brother. Kyle Brennan had been my business partner for 12 years. Georgia's younger brother, a commercial architect who had joined Morrison Construction when Moore started bidding on larger projects that required his design expertise. I'd trusted him with company finances, project planning, and confidential cleaned information. I'd also trusted him with my marriage. Patricia's report was thorough and devastating. Kyle had been meeting with Victoria twice a week for the past 6 months, always at small restaurants outside Billings, where they were unlikely to be seen by anyone who knew us both. The meetings had started as brief coffee conversations, but had grown into lengthy dinner discussions. Victoria pumped Kyle for detailed information about our business operations. She's been asking him about cash flow, upcoming contracts, and real estate holdings, Patricia explained. Your partner's been providing her with information that shall be protected by business confidentiality agreements, but it was worse than corporate. Patricia had photographed them together, and their body language told a story that went beyond business consultation. Victoria and Kyle weren't just sharing information, they were sharing intimacy. How long has this been going on? I asked. The business meeting started 6 months ago, but I found evidence of contact going back 14 months. Text messages, phone calls, hotel receipts. Mr. Morrison, your wife has been having an affair with your business partner since before your parents died. The timeline made sickening sense. Victoria's sudden disinterest in our her questions about Thebasiness, her reluctance to spend time at the lake. It had all started around the time Kyle had begun working more closely with our residential event projects. I thought back to company dinners, holiday parties, casual conversations where Kyle had been. He'd heard me talk about family finances, inheritance plans, and my intentions for the lake house. He'd known exactly what Victoria would need to build her divorce case. There's more, Patricia continued. I believe they're planning to start a business together after the divorce is finalized. Victoria's interior design company isn't just a side project. It's meant to be a full partnership with Kyle. She gets your money in the divorce settlement. He provides architectural services and they build a competing business using the client relationships he's developed while working for you. The betrayal was my wife and my business partner had been planning to destroy my life and build their new one on the ruins. I called George immediately. When I told him what Patricia had discovered, the silence on the phone lasted nearly a minute. Jesus Christ, Alan. Kyle's my brother. I know this is going to destroy our family. He destroyed it when he decided to betray a business and help my wife steal everything I've built. George's voice was quiet, professional. What do y'all want to do? I want to beat them at their own game. I'd been thinking about that since Patricia's call. Victoria and Kyle had spent months building their case against me, but they'd made a no critical mistake. They'd underestimated how well I knew my own business and how carefully I'd documented everything over the years. They want I'll give them they want to know about business valuations. I'll provide a complete transparency. They want to play games with asset assessment. I'll show them how the game really works. Alan, what are you planning? I'm planning to give Victoria exactly what she's all of it, every single demand she's made. That doesn't make sense. It will. The key to everything was a document Victoria had never seen, filed 18 months ago in a safety deposit box, didn't know existed. After my parents died, I'd restructured Morrison Construction to protect it from exactly the kind of legal assault Victoria was mounting. Working with a corporate attorney from Denver, I'd created a complex business structure that separated the company's valuable assets from its operational liability. The Alan Morrison, who owned 51% of Morrison, was technically just an employee of Morrison Holdings, a Montana limited liability company that owned their real estate, equipment, and intellectual property that made the construction business valuable. Morrison Holdings was controlled by the Morrison Family Trust, which I'd established using my inheritance from my parents' estate. Victoria could demand half of Alan Morrison's share in Morrison Construction, but that share was only worth about $200,000 in equipment and current contracts. The real value The land, buildings, heavy machinery, and established client relationships belonged to entities she had no legal claim to. Kyle had been feeding her information about Morrison Construction's revenue and assets. Buth didn't know about the holding company structure because it had been established before he'd been granted access to the financial records. To him, it looked like I owned everything directly, but the real masterstroke waste lake. 3 months after my parents did, I'd transferred the property to the Morrison Family Trust with a specific provision. It could never be sold or transferred outside the family. If my marriage ended without children, the property would eventually pass to my cousin's kids in Colorado. Victoria could demand the lake house in the divorce, but I literally didn't have a legal authority to give it to her. The trust documents made that. Patricia had helped gather evidence of Victoria's affair with Kyle, but I wasn't planning to use it for revenge. I was planning to use it for leverage. Here's what's going to happen. I told George on the day of the final hearing, I'm going to give Victoria everything she's asking for, $14 million. Half of Morrison Construction, spousal support, everything. Alan, you can't afford that. I can't afford not to. When the judge awards her those assets and she tries take, she's going to discover that most of what she's been promised doesn't Texas in the form she thinks it does. The business she gets half of is worth almost nothing. The cash settlement comes from accounts that are controlled by the trust, not by me personally. What happens then? Then I offer her she can spend the next 5 years in court trying to break the trust and challenge the business structure, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on legal fees with no guarantee of success, or she can accept a reasonable cash settlement and walk away. How much? $2 million. Enough for her to start over. Not enough to destroy what I've built. George was quiet for a moment. What about Kyle? Kyle's partnership agreement has a if he's found to have violated his fiduciary duty to the company, engaged in behavior that damages Morrison Construction's reputation, he can be bought out at book value with 30 days notice. The affair is a violation of his fiduciary duty since he was sharing confidential business information with someone who intended to use it against the company. Patricia has seen evidence to prove that in court. The plan was elegant and brutal. Victoria and Kyle had spent months building a trap for me, but they built it using incomplete information. Now they were going to discover what happened when you tried to steal something that doesn't belong to the person you're stealing from. The courtroom was packed when Judge Harrison called our case. Victoria sat at the plaintiff's table wearing a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, projecting the image of a wronged wife who'd sacrifice everything for her husband's success. Her lawyer, a sharp-dressed man from Missoula named David Walsh, presented their case with theatrical precision. Victoria had built Alan Morrison's life. They argued she'd supported his business ventures, managed their home, sacrificed her own career ambitions for his. Now she was entitled to half of everything they'd built together. When Judge Harrison asked if I contested any of Victoria's demands, I surprised everyone in the room. No, Your Honor, I agree to all of them. Victoria's head snapped toward me. Her lawyer looked confused. Even George seemed startled. You agree to the $14 million settlement? Judge Harrison asked. Yes, Your Honor. Half ownership of Morrison Construction. Yes, Your Honor. The lake house property. Yes, Your Honor. Victoria was smiling though, probably thinking she'd broken me completely. Kyle, sitting in the gallery behind her, looked smug. Judge Harrison reviewed the items one more time, then signed the divorce decree. Mr. Morrison, you have 60 days to comply with the property transfers and financial settlements. That's when I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. Your Honor, there's one additional document I'd like to submit for the record. I handed the folder to the bailiff who passed it to Judge Harrison. Inside whereth corporate structured documents for Morrison Holdings, the trust, paperwork for the family land, and Patricia's investigative report documenting Victoria's affair, and Kyle's breach of fiduciary duty. Judge Harrison read for several minutes while the courtroom remained silent. Victoria's smile faded as she watched his expression change. Mr. Morrison, the judge said finally, it appears the assets your wife has been awarded may not be accessible in the manner she anticipated. That's correct, Your Honor, but I'm prepared to honor the spirit of thy settlement with a revised offer. I turned to face Victoria directly. $2 million cash, and you walk away from everything else. Take it or spend the next 5 years in court. Her face went white. Victoria's lawyer requested an immediate recess to review the documents it submitted. When they returned to their courtroom 30 minutes later, Victoria looked like she'd aged 10 years. Walsh's confident demeanor had evaporated completely. Your Honor, Walsh said, My client would like to accept Mr. Morrison's revised settlement offer. Judge Harrison looked at Victoria. Mrs. Morrison, do you understand that you're accepting $2 million instead of the $14 million previously awarded? Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. Yes, Your Honor. The papers were signed that afternoon. Victoria took her $2 million and disappeared from Billings within a week. I heard later that she'd moved to Seattle, where she tried to start an interior design business that failed within 6 months. Kyle's buyout was finalized 3 days after the divorce. Book value for his partnership share came to $87,000, considerably less than the millions he'd thought he was helping Victoria steal. George handled the transaction but I knew it destroyed their family relationship. Kyle left Montana and never came back. I drove out to the lake house that weekend, sat on my grandfather's dock, and watched the sunset over water that would stay in my family for generations to come. The mountains reflected perfectly in the still surface, just like they had when I was a boy learning to fish from a Morrison. Construction thrived without the distraction of a failing marriage and the drain of Kyle's disloyalty. We landed 3 major contracts that fall and expanded into commercial development throughout western Montana. I never remarried. Some betrayals teach you things about trust that can't be unlearned, but I built a good life. Honest work, family land, and the satisfaction of knowing that when Simone tried to destroy everything I'd built, I was strong enough and smart enough to protect it. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to bet